Happy House Hill by Tuawe. Once upon a time, there was a marvelous house on a modest hill at the edge of a quaint little town. That happy house was a good house. It loved to try to make people happy, but it always knew that people who would come to live within it would leave eventually. It struggled to understand the human mind. It made the house sad to think about how lonely it would be without a family, as it wondered, why do people leave me? Where do they go? I make them happy, but end up alone. The happy house was overjoyed. A family had arrived, a daughter, a mother, and a father. They had a small dog with them as well. The happy house didn't like animals very much. They never seemed to like Happy House, regardless of whatever the happy house would do. It liked that the dog made the family happy, and that was enough. The happy house thought that maybe it had something in common with the dog in that regard. The happy house noted that the family seemed to want to change things on the inside. Some of it tickled, but a lot of it hurt. It didn't want the family to leave, so it put up with about as much as it could, until it realized they were getting closer and closer to its heart. The dark, moist room, hidden behind the kitchen, always warm, and filled with strange devices and machinery. It was the happy house's absolute favorite spot for humans to visit, but it's also the only part that was seriously at risk of injury. If someone changed my big happy heart, perhaps then again, the sadness would start. The happy house winced in fear. There will only be one I let inside. For the daughter alone, my heart opens wide. Late in the night, as the daughter was sleeping, the happy house noticed something concerning. The parents were awake in their room, panting and moaning, struggling to situate themselves properly. Struggling to sleep. The happy house knew it had to stop whatever was happening to them, for this obviously couldn't make them happy. I know the way to help them relax. The shelf shall fall, swift as an axe. No sooner did the happy house come up with the idea than the shelf fell, connecting with the father's head, putting him instantly to sleep. The mother seemed ecstatic. She screamed with joy and hopped out of bed. She hurried to the phone and began to contact someone. It's obvious that she was so thrilled she had to share the news. The father never had trouble sleeping again. For several weeks, the happy house was so thrilled. The mother and daughter rarely left. The father didn't do much. He had plenty of strange beeping machines around him now. He really liked sleeping. I truly excelled. I've never seen someone sleep half as well. The happy house praised itself. It was worried it hadn't done well at first because the mother, daughter, and sleepy father all left in a strange white vehicle. But they came back, and it's never been happier. The daughter had found the entrance to the heart shortly after they returned. She certainly liked to spend time there, and this pleased the happy house to no end. She'd often crawl into the lower cabinet, beside the fridge. The happy house would then shift the wall to let her in. It could tell that she felt safe there. With the father enjoying his rest so much, the daughter and mother went to see him less and less. They must have been worried about interrupting his deep sleep. It was very blissful for the happy house, as it felt the father's dreams. It saw many strange things, but mainly the family being together. It didn't like that they weren't in the happy house in these dreams, but it was slowly working to trying to fix that too. Today is a sad day. I feel like I'll cry. The father alone still remains inside. The daughter and dog went for a walk. The dog ran away and gave her a shock. Normally the happy house wouldn't have been terribly concerned about the dog, but it had caused the mother and daughter to leave in search of it. They'd been gone all day. The happy house knew it had to do something to bring them back, but it couldn't think of what. As the hours passed, it dawned on it. It's truly rude to interrupt rest, but waking him now would be for the best. The father rose, confused and weary. He had a strange vacancy in his thoughts. The happy house had never been this connected to a human before. It was truly a delight to know their mind. It bade the father to go outside and look for the place where the dog's gone to hide. It didn't take long for the father to find the dog. It grabbed it tightly by the collar. The dog began to bark loudly. The house knew the animal was causing far too much distress for the poor family, so it had to get rid of it. As the father gripped tighter, trying to stifle the dog's barks and whimpers, the happy house saw the mother and daughter running over. The dog slipped free, to the father's surprise, and ran off into the surrounding trees. The daughter was all too happy to greet their father, and hopped into his arms. This is exactly as it should be. The dog's better too, having been freed. Everything seemed to be coming back into place for the happy house, but it noticed the mother hadn't greeted the father yet. Instead, she looked off in the distance to where the dog had run. For some strange reason, the happy house could see something through the father's eyes, something it couldn't see on its own. The mother was not happy. She was concerned. Time went on and the daughter was happy. The mother seemed happy too, for a while. It was strange, though. Now that the happy house could connect with the father, things seemed different through his eyes. The happy house could tell the father what to feel, so he was usually happy, but for some reason he had strange desires that the happy house couldn't quell. The happy house also noticed through the father's eyes the mother wasn't truly happy. There was something missing. It studied the family for some time, trying to understand the father's thoughts. It slowly began to understand the strange noises that the daughter and mother would make. It seemed they were concerned that the father wouldn't make the same noises anymore. One day, the mother made it clear that she wanted to live elsewhere. She wasn't happy in the house. The memories of the mother and father tossing the night of the father's long sleep came into its mind. What can I do? I've given so much. Maybe she misses the father's old touch. The father began to have a strange sort of excitement. Perhaps she felt the same way. It made the father head to the bedroom, where the mother was packing her things. Grab the mother, she needs your love. If she tries to resist, just give her a shove. The father mindlessly obeyed. He pushed her onto the bed as she yelled and wriggled about. The happy house felt strange. Through its own eyes, it could see that she was happy, screaming in joy. When it looked again through the father's, it felt wrong and disturbing. He pushed her head against the backboard a few times until she settled down. This is the right way, I'm starting to learn. I feel both their hearts, for each other they yearn. The happy house relinquished its hold on the father, hoping simply to spectate. It couldn't help but notice the daughter had quickly run to the cabinet and was entering the heart. She must be so happy that her parents are reuniting. The father stood blankly over the bruised, naked mother on the bed. He was unsure of what to do next without the happy house. How could he know? Suddenly, the mother rolled off the bed and started running down the stairs. She was yelling something to the daughter. She wanted both of them to leave. The daughter was slowly crawling out of the cabinet, heading toward the mother. You can't let them go. Use all of your might. Don't leave me alone. It just isn't right. With the happy house commands once more filling the father's thoughts, he swiftly went to the closet in the hallway, removing an axe. He stormed down the stairs to see the mother facing the kitchen. She reached for the daughter's arm, but the father's axe was too quick. It had been firmly planted in the mother's skull, handle protruding outward as if lodged in a stump. The happy house no longer felt her at all. The daughter screamed, tears running down her face. She turned back to the kitchen and fled to the heart. The happy house, for the first time, could tell the daughter was scared. It could feel the terrible flood of negative emotions sympathetically through her father. The mother is gone, sad as it is. Comfort your daughter, at least she still lives. The father grunted in acknowledgement of the happy house's new command, the first sound of sentience since his coma. With a firm stride, he headed into the kitchen. As the footsteps closed in, nearer and nearer, the daughter scrambled for an escape. She began yanking clusters of wires, clawing at the walls and pulling at stray pipes. The happy house started to writhe in agony. The foundations began to shake. "Stop her now, at any cost! She's harming my heart! A paradise lost!" With no hesitation, the father swung the axe into the wall, again and again. He was able to see her through the gap. She screamed even louder, banging on some strange infernal machinery inside. The father hacked and hacked. The happy house began to feel weak. It tried to issue one last command to the father. "I'm losing my hold, but I can't let you free. If I lose my strength, you'll be host to me." The fog had now cleared, thoughts had returned. Terrible pictures in his mind burned. He questioned in his brain, "Is this all real?" He struggled with what and how he should feel. "My thoughts are riddles. Why do I rhyme?" The happy house voiced, then chimed in his mind. "Of the last that I am, now we are one. Don't be troubled by what we have done." The man saw his daughter's mangled remains. "What have I done?" he cried out in shame. One final idea, he knew it his own. "I'll burn it all down. This demonic hellhole." He gently blew out the pilots and cranked all the knobs on the oven. After closing the kitchen door and windows, he sifted through a drawer, finding a matchbook. The man sat down, no longer a father, no longer a husband. A deranged cadence of protesting thoughts assaulted him as he waited. He could smell the gas building. He felt lightheaded. "Don't continue. You know what you'll do. We'll start again, afresh, anew." "I've killed my family. I can't comprehend. This is the way. Together we end," he said aloud as he struck the match. Still to this day, in the locals' renown, go to the woods by the edge of town. You'll hear shrill screams, smell smoke and fire. No one around will call you a liar. If you go up, be ready to pray. Ignore all whispers, whatever they say. There's a dog in the ruins, weeping at will, up in the ashes of Happy House Hill. Story by Santia Godelma. We were warned that the land beneath our home had learned to hate. We should have run when we had the chance. 2 weeks. That's how long it took for my life to fall apart. 2 weeks for everything I ever loved or cared about to be taken away from me in the cruelest way imaginable. It had all started on that hateful plot of land that was supposed to be my family's new home. We'd bought the house a month earlier and packed our lives up in SoCal and moved to Northern California. It was unassuming, 2-story, 3-bedroom, cheaply built and overpriced in an attempt to cash in on the housing shortage. The whole housing subdivision was like that, and in the end, the gamble failed. Only about a third of the houses were occupied. We arrived early in the morning. Spring had just reared its head and showers still peppered the land. This particular morning, a light drizzle had been falling for a few hours. On a front lawn, staring directly at us as we pulled in, was a kid crying. Even through the rain, I could see from the way his shoulders and chest shuddered. The woman was standing a few feet away, staring at the boy. "Are you okay?" my fiancée Laurie asked, stepping out of the car. The boy, who couldn't have been older than 17, nodded slightly and walked away, pausing halfway down the street to look back and shake his head. The woman, in her 60s, walked up as he strode out of sight and spoke to us. "He's crying for you." "Excuse me?" I asked her. "He's like an omen. I saw him crying a week before my husband went missing. All they found of him was the joint to his index finger. I'd leave and never look back if I were you." "I'm sorry, are you a neighbor?" Laurie asked. "Nah, I don't live here. Just follow the boy around whenever I see him crying.
never says anything to the people he's supposed to warn, so that's why I'm here. I know you're kind, though. Young, arrogant, and unwilling to listen. It's fine, I'm just a crazy old lady. Just know this land here, it knows nothing but tragedy. Settlers watered it in blood of Indians slaughtered by the hundreds, and before them, they did it to each other. See, bound by tragedy, it'll come to pass again.
I think you should be going, I said firmly.
I'm off, just don't say I didn't warn you,
she said as she hobbled away. What the hell was that about? I asked, facing Laurie.
Locals trying to scare us. I get it. People like us move en masse, raise rents, vote differently, and change their way of life. It's easy to see why they get resentful.
She saw the look in my eyes and frowned.
Amir, I didn't mean it like that. I'm not trying to sympathize with bigots. I'm just saying my parents think like her. I know what's running through her mind. But honestly, fuck her. She doesn't matter, we do. The people around here are probably getting everything handed to them. Why can't we take a little something for ourselves?
I was comforted by her words then, but in hindsight, she was wrong. Mrs. Norris was eccentric and crotchety, but she never had anything handed to her. She grew up poor and lived poor most of her life, and even now, she works as a Walmart greeter. If anyone had been lucky, it had been me. My entire life, I only failed upwards. When I fucked off in high school, Mom and Dad's alumni status and hefty donations to an Ivy League school ensured my acceptance. When I renounced my parents' faith, they stopped talking to me, but made sure my classes were paid for, and they always kept me in their prayers. I had a job lined up for me the moment I graduated at my dad's law firm, even if he scheduled it so we'd never interact. He even left me a trust fund that was enough to afford this house, and co-signed when Laurie asked him to. I didn't know until after the horrors I'd experienced how good I'd had it. Guess you don't know what you have until it's wrenched from your hands. Laurie brought Carter out of his seat, my beautiful son, 1.5 years now. I wanted to name him after my brother. He was closer to me in skin tone than Laurie, and he even had my father's eyes. But in Laurie's exact words, "You didn't carry him for 9 months. You weren't even there for me until the last second." It was true. My son was born 2 months after I graduated. I didn't want to be a father. I held firm to this even when a casual fling ended with a pregnancy neither her parents nor I wanted. But she was resolute. Laurie was stubborn like that, driven by rebellious impulse. The only reason she had hooked up with me was that she knew I'd piss her parents off, especially her dad. We agreed that she'd have full custody and I wouldn't have to meet the kid. I had agreed, but when her labor came, she called me while she was on the way to the hospital. She was afraid and her parents had all but disowned her. I came. I shouldn't have. Every part of my body was screaming for me to just run, but on impulse I showed up. When I held him for the first time in my arms, I knew this was all I ever wanted. I cried, of course, and broke into myself that I had ever considered cutting my beautiful baby boy from my life. I proposed later that night, and Laurie said yes, almost in shock. I told myself we were fighting against the world that day, against her racist parents, against ourselves. I'd make this work. I'd fight for us. For Carter. We brought our son inside, did some unpacking, and settled in for the night. I ended up falling asleep on the couch after a few beers and some late-night TV. Laurie put Carter to bed and went to bed alone, later telling me she didn't want to wake me. What roused me that night was a sound, something that pierced the veil of dream and reeled me back into the real world. Thump! My eyes shot open and I sat up, and looked around the living room. Only a few dim beams of streetlight peered through the window, their pallid light doing little to render anything visible beyond a blurry silhouette.
I froze, let my heart settle, waited for what felt like an eternity, then laid back down. Thump! Thump! I lay there, still and attentive, trying to parse what the sound was and where it was coming from. I tried to rationalize it as Laurie being up and about, but as the sound repeated, I picked up details that cast certainty into doubt. There was a slick wetness to it that couldn't have been Laurie, unless she now took to dragging wet rolls of tarp around in the middle of the night. I waited and listened until the sounds faded. I don't know if they actually did or if the pull of sleep overcame my unease. All I know is that when I woke up, nearly late for work, and before I could ask Laurie if she had heard anything, I had fled the house and sped all the way to my dad's newly opened NorCal office. Later that day, I returned home and found Laurie on the front lawn, Carter in hand, waiting for me. Her face was contorted into an annoyed scowl. "What's wrong?" I asked, stepping out the car. "That weird kid was back, around noon. So was the old lady." "What did they want?" "I think they're trying to scare us out of here." The kid was crying again, bawling actually. The lady was behind him and said that it's already started and that our clock was ticking down. When I asked her what she meant by all that, she all but threatened me. She said, "The earth, it weeps and remembers the cruelties inflicted upon it. You'll see. It'll claim its due one way or another." I told them I was going to call the cops and they left, but it didn't sit right with me. They're harassing some of the other neighbors too, and it's just weird. Did the real estate agent say anything about this place? "It's an entirely new housing development. There is no history to tell. Why? Did they get to you?" "No, it's just that last night I heard something, like a dragging sound. I thought maybe it was you, but it felt like something was watching me. It didn't feel like you." "I heard that too. Didn't feel like anyone watching me, just the noise." "Maybe we should call someone? A priest or—" "Laurie, don't tell me you buy into that shit after one night of something that's easily explained." "It's not too uncommon for people to have houses cleansed when they move. Maybe it's worth entertaining. Just down the street from us are nature reserves that used to be native land." "Maybe it's them. Ever think of that? You said to yourself, they have every reason to try and get rid of us." "That's a little convoluted, isn't it? Why would anyone go out of their way like that for us? What about the others they bothered?"
"Plenty of people have gone after us for less, Laurie. Having my kid put you at odds with half of your family alone. Your dad shot at me. I'm not surprised by the crazy shit people do anymore. We'll let security know they're harassing us. Problem solved." Laurie looked at me with weary eyes. "Maybe." She glanced back down at Carter, who giggled and smiled. "Yeah, you're right," she said, and let her shoulders relax. A few days went by without incident, and I was starting to settle into the flow of things. We got to know some of our neighbors, at Laurie's behest, and I was trying to get Carter to say his first words, but the word "dada" seemed to evade him. Laurie was still in a bit of a funk. She got it often enough that I talked about therapy, though she was always evading the topic. She dropped out of college, was disowned by her parents, and got engaged to the man responsible for her fall from grace on a whim. I caught her crying half a dozen times since she'd given birth. We hadn't had sex more than a few times since she gave birth. I could tell she wanted to be more than a housewife, and I know we needed the extra income. When I brought up that I was being groomed for a promotion, her eyes lit up.
"Think we'd be able to afford childcare? Would be nice to have some time to work, maybe even finish my degree."
"It's in the realm of possibility. Still dream of being a nurse?" I said, smiling.
"I could change to accounting so I can annoy the hell out of you at work," she said with a laugh.
All seemed to be right in the world. Nowhere to go but up. We put Carter to bed in his room, and Laura and I settled into our bed for the night. I rolled over onto her side, pressed against her, and said, "Let's make a brother for Carter."
Laurie looked at me stunned for the first time before her face slacked into a grin. You think you can decide that? We can try. And what if I want a girl? We can try for a girl after we give Carter a brother. Think about it. Boys need other boys their age, and our daughter gets 2 older brothers to protect her. You make a compelling argument, she said, and moved to straddle me. We broke into a wrestling match, disrobing one another with every hold and shift of motion. Laurie was halfway through pulling my boxers down when the sound of glass shattering froze us both in place. Seconds ticked by as my muscles tensed in anticipation. Another explosion of glass made the both of us flinch, and Carter awakened with a snort and then a wail. Go, I said to Laurie, and she launched herself to Carter's room. I pulled my boxers up as I made my way downstairs. I snagged the bedside bat as another series of glass-shattering staccatos rang out through the house. What the fuck? Laurie shouted as I ran past, bat held so tightly in my hands that my knuckles paled. In my anger and haste, I sprinted into the kitchen without thinking. As I flicked on the lights, I stepped onto a shard of glass. Fuck! I yelled as it bit into my flesh. I looked around at the sight before me, blood pooling steadily around my foot. Nothing but a cabinet and half a dozen glass cups scattered across the floor. I set the bat down on the counter and pried the sizable glass shard out of my foot. I didn't have time to dress it. A scream rang out from upstairs. Amir! Amir! Called Laurie from upstairs, and I sprang up, ran towards them, leaving bloody footprints on the hardwood and carpeted stairs. I was yelling at myself internally. Whatever was doing this succeeded in separating us. As I reached the hallway, it dawned on me that I left the bat on the counter. Though my stomach tied itself in knots at the realization that I'd have to face whatever was in the room unarmed, nearly naked and bleeding, I did not slow or relent. I flung myself through the open door, wide-eyed and ready to fight. Laurie was huddled in the furthest corner, our wailing son held close to her chest, a finger outstretched and pointing to the closet that faced her. My eyes flicked to where she pointed in a swirling darkness of the open closet door, and for the briefest of moments, I thought I saw movement. Muscles tensed and I raised my fist, but the apparition was dispelled the second I focused on it. Already realizations formed within me, and adrenaline-fueled delusion was one I clung to. What? What did you see? I asked Laurie, and she tried to soothe Carter. I don't know. There was something there. In the closet. It was staring at us, she said, and gazed down at the blood seeping into the carpet. What happened downstairs? The cupboard was open and the glass fell out. Amir, that doesn't just happen. We can't stay here anymore. And what do you propose we do? Go to a hotel, put the house on the market, and hope that we scrounge enough to find somewhere else to live? Why not? Because this is our only chance, Laurie. Because we have nothing else. We've made it here and we can't take a gamble like that. Half the houses here are empty. They haven't sold. If we leave and are worse off than when we started, we have no one to turn to. Not your parents, not mine, not a single friend. No one but us. We have to fight, Laurie. For us. For Carter. Carter had quieted, but Laurie had tears carving slow paths down her cheek. I didn't think it would be this hard. I didn't expect a walk in the park, but fuck, I didn't think it'd be like this. Every day is a pit I have to crawl out from, and every day it feels deeper. I closed the distance between us, embraced her and Carter, and my head on hers I asked her to fight. And through the tears and quiet hiccups, she said, I will. We spent the next hours cleaning up the house. Laurie bandaged my foot, and we planned to rent a carpet cleaner for all the blood. We moved Carter's crib into our bedroom at Laurie's request, so that killed my plans for making Carter a brother. Things settled for the night, and we fell into a fretful sleep. The next day as I was coming home from work, I noticed that strange kid again. Mrs. Norris was far behind on the intersection of my street and another. Like before, he was walking aimlessly but paused in front of our house. He was crying again, but harder this time. Sobs racked his body as he struggled to hold a steady breath. "You're not supposed to be here," I said as I walked by. He nodded and kept walking, but paused for a moment, letting his crying die down until he could speak. And he said, "You're the ones that don't belong. The earth here, it's wept and none listened to its pleas, and so now it lashes out." I headed towards him at a brisk pace and grabbed onto his shirt, pulling him close that he could see how deadly serious I was. "Are you threatening me and my family?" He met my gaze. There was nothing in his eyes, no provocation, but he was crying again. A smile split his face, and his unsettlingly perfect teeth bared. He looked back into my eyes and said, "It'll all end in screams." He shook his head and laugh-cried until I was disturbed enough to let him go. He started walking away from me again, almost limping now, and I regretted not slugging him when I had the chance. Now I had to deal with the hobbling hag, Mrs. Norris. Henry, a neighbor I recognized from 3 doors down, was turning away from her. His walk was tense, and he retreated back into his house. The old woman locked eyes with me and approached to speak. I let out a sigh as she closed the distance. "Since you're too much of a damn fool to heed a warning from those who know better, let me give you a word of advice. Offer yourself in their place. Take your blood, slather it on your door, offer your life. You'll spend every waking moment of your life in regret if you don't." "What biblical bullshit are you babbling about? I won't buy into your madness." "My husband and I were planning on starting a family before it took him. I haven't moved forward a day since the day I lost him. That was 17 years ago, and that boy hasn't aged a day since. He knew. Like an angel of death, he knew it would come for me. It took my future, and I've spent every moment I can trying to warn others of what happens when the earth learns to hate, but every single last one of you has been so stubborn. I haven't saved a single one. Maybe there's another aspect of its malice. But God, if I don't try, this whole neighborhood would collapse under the weight of its own hubris. Please." "Look, lady, you're obviously struggling with something. I feel for you, but I won't let you project your delusions onto me and my family. I hope you can get the help you need, but stay the fuck away from us." She looked at me dejected. She turned away from me and hobbled off. She said, "Fine," in such a hoarse and airy whisper, I almost thought it was a phantom. As she rounded a corner and escaped my glare, I felt a sting of dull pain throb through my foot. My wound had reopened and fresh blood flowed and seeped into my shoes and the earth. "How was work?" Laurie asked over dinner once we had settled in. "Fine. Beulah's talk of promotions has all but dried up, though." "I'm sure it'll come up again. You're a hard worker." "Let's hope Dad's not in his ear. What about you? How was your day?" "Fine. We spent it at the park. We went for lunch, and we've just been out and about, seeing the town." "You're afraid to be here alone?" "Why wouldn't I be? Something was staring at me and Carter. It wanted to hurt us. I'm not comfortable here alone." Maybe Mrs. Norris was right. I set down my fork and looked at her. Her face was unreadable, but she wouldn't have said anything unless she was mad at me. "Laurie, can we not? I'm sorry I wasn't around. I would have loved to spend the day with you and Carter. I'll look into affordable daycare, and you can start looking for a job so you can get some time out of the house. I'm sure things will settle in a bit, and we'll be better off." Her hand slid over the top of mine, and she spoke. "I'd like that, and I'm sorry. I shouldn't have been so standoffish. I've been so stressed. You've been stressed. It's all been one big ball of stress since we moved in. I'm sure you're right. We'll be fine in the end." Her hand tightened around mine, and I maneuvered around so I could interlace her fingers with mine. Wordlessly, we ate dinner, put Carter to sleep. and made love in the next room. When we had finished, we lay down to sleep, and in the moments before I faded into dreams, I thought that despite all, I truly was a lucky man. Thump! My eyes flung open as I was jolted awake. My heart raced as my eyes darted around the room, scanning for movement. Why tonight of all nights? I couldn't help but mutter under my breath. Only a pale beam of moonlight streamed in through the parted curtains. A silver sliver cleaving through the dark of the room. Nothing. It had been nothing, I tried to tell myself. Thump! The sound was closer than it had ever been. I even picked up small details. An organic squelch, wetness, a small raspy moan. It was in the room with us. It was moving closer. I sat up, causing Laurie to stir. My hand reached for my bat by the nightstand, and at the same moment, a desiccated arm reached through the darkness and planted itself firmly in the beam of moonlight. Its hand rested upon what I now saw was a bloody pulpy mess. I brought the bat to my chest and watched in horror as it dragged itself into view. A bone-white and withered naked woman, her eye sockets empty and void black. She strained and flexed as she scraped her crotch against the floor, leaving bits of skin and sinew all white, making the damn sound th. And her hand came down to force a thump. She turned to face me, wiry hair parting so I could see her lipless grin. She turned away and continued to drag herself across the floor, deepening the gash. How long has she been at it before I woke? Laurie jolted awake and gasped at the sight. A scream caught in her throat. She turned to look wide-eyed at me, and the fear in my eyes caused her own to deepen. Thump! And the woman was in the veil of the darkness once more, but through it we could still see her silhouette and burning grin. I started to get up, to confront her, when the temperature of the room dived. In a split second, a heavy breath was visible in quick bursts of white vapor. A crack reverberated throughout the house, and the long gash in the floor split open. The dimensions of the floor warped as a giant, pockmarked skull crowned. It must have been as big as our bed, and it kept pushing and jerking until finally it broke free. A giant head from the neck up was staring at us. Mummified skin yellowed like ancient papyrus. Its visage was harsh, angular, and skeletal. Holes and lines, rimmed with blackened flesh, scarred every inch of its skin. Slowly and methodically, a giant hand slid out from the gash, inching towards Carter's crib. Slow, lurid movements as the hand snaked across the air into the crib. My body was a cage, and from it, I screamed with all my might, and yet it made no sound as the ragged, fleshy fingers curled around Carter and hoisted him up. Laurie screamed, Carter wailed, and something clicked into place. An ancient instinct, a righteous gene. I slid the covers off and held the bat out. I'd fight. I had no other choice. The hand paused, and the head's attention shifted to me, and it blossomed. Every hole in its skin now filled with the hateful glare of an eye, hundreds of them. Every line opened and a black-toothed smile grinned with its whole being. This thing was grinning at me. I understood it then, the depth of its rage. It all unfurled and wrapped around me and sank its blackened teeth into the bravado and fatherly instinct within me until it shattered. It hated me. It hated me, Laurie, Carter, us. It hated all the world it would consume, all it could with its wrath. The bat fell from my hands as my body went limp and it opened up its mouth. The black pit of its gullet stared into me, and I was sinking into its pitch. An ear-splitting shriek dragged me back out into this world, and I watched in agonizing slow motion as it brought the hand it held Carter in closer and closer to its mouth. I wanted to scream, wanted to stop it, wanted to close my eyes, but I only watched as this emanation of hatred brought my son to its lips and took a bite. The crunch is seared into the very core of my being. I'll never forget, no matter how hard I try. A pitiful cry that never truly formed clicked in my head, and a crimson curtain fell. 1,000 tongues, 1,000 mouths, all opened and clashed against each other to lap up the blood of my son, the blood of me and Laurie. Our entire history, our future gone. The hand pulled back, twisted as it did. The sound of small frail bones breaking and flesh tearing echoed throughout my entire being, and still I couldn't look away. It took 2 more bites for it to finish, and it made sure to take its time chewing. When it finally swallowed, it pursed its lips at me, smiled stain red, and dove into the gash. It sealed itself and returned the pulpy stain it had originally been, now with a few more blood stains. My ears ringing, my screams, Laurie's, the whole neighborhood was shrieking out into the night. In the corner, the naked woman watched us as we shrieked ourselves raw until she faded too into blackness. Dawn came a few hours later, but night had been lit by blues and reds of police cars. I saw the strange kid amongst the crowd of people. He wasn't crying anymore. His eyes were empty and solemn, but the grin he had flashed me the day before was still carved into his visage. Mrs. Norris was at his side. Our eyes locked, and an understanding was shared between us. She shook her head, wiped a tear from her eye, and turned to leave. Everyone had lost someone that night. Caroline, a widow, was never found, only an empty house and a bloodstain. Joshua, a single father, awoke to his daughter's room, empty except for a fading silhouette of a woman hidden within a dark corner. The house that was occupied by Henry and his chocolate lab. The dog was found alone with the bisected lower half of a man. There are other tales and losses too painful to hear, but no one escaped the wrath of that angel of death. A resentful plot of land. Or maybe some unknown Jews finally being paid. I couldn't answer the police's questions, and they couldn't answer ours. Not even the local news stations would hear our pleas. Maybe there was some higher power at play trying to cover up the event, the calamity that shattered the lives of dozens. Maybe the truth will come out one day. Or maybe this has happened before, and they've perfected the methods of covering it up. If there's a consequence in store for my account, I'll be dead before I ever face it. That fateful night was 3 days ago. I haven't gone to work since, or even talked to Laurie. Catatonic, my mind regressed into a shell of itself, because what else could I have done? Yesterday I walked in on Laurie, lifeless. She downed all of the bottles of medication she could find. I thought I had nothing left to lose, but when I saw her, that shell, it broke, and I collapsed into myself more than I knew I ever could. I think I'll be following after her and Carter before the day is done. I was never a religious man. That's why my father disowned me. Now I pray that they're out there in a better place, and that they're waiting for me, and we won't have to fight anymore. My father once told me that children are our legacy, our future, and to be fruitful. I think about how much we've taken from the earth and how much suffering it's witnessed, how much blood has been spilt on it, how long it must have spent beneath our shadow, weeping, praying for it to end. With enough time and tragedy, even the brightest of hearts warp and twist into something else,
Maybe you can only take from someone so much before it takes back. It took everything from me. I don't know how far this spreads, where and if it'll strike again. All I know is that the very earth we tread and live on can grow to hate us. And maybe for you, it already does. Empty House by Umbrello. Bored teenagers picked the worst places to hang out. Of course, this was the East End of Long Island, where all teenagers are bored. There's nothing to do during the day if you're not into sun and surf, and even less in the evenings. Summers are full of tourists, traffic and nightclubs, convertibles still running outside of stores. The rest of the year it's quiet, and in the winter, desolate. I was out with a group of friends that night. Well, they weren't really my friends, but we hung out. They'd always drag me somewhere creepy in the dark to get high. Usually it was some place in the woods where I can't see my hand in front of my face. One time it was an old betting track that had been condemned. Then there was the obvious one, a cemetery. Nothing says buzzkill like being surrounded by dead people. Sometimes I wasn't sure if it was better than staying home alone. By far the worst place they took me to was the site of the Montauk Project, an abandoned military base where they claimed they did experiments with time travel and mind control. If that wasn't disturbing enough, the guy who took us there, Mike, told all these bullshit stories about feral people living in the tunnels. We even went up to the roof of a 10 or so story building that was rusted and decaying inside. Not only am I afraid of heights, but the roof was sloped on all sides, which made me feel like I was falling off. This is kinda creepy. Where are we going? I asked, hoping it would be tame in comparison. We're going to an abandoned house, said Mike, much to my dismay. People had often tried getting me to go to abandoned houses, but I always refused. At least those other houses were near a main road, but wherever we were going was far off the beaten path. We'd been driving for a while in the pitch black, down some road that felt endless. I couldn't see in front of us either, since the car we were all following was blocking the view, and Mike was driving pretty close. It's not really abandoned, said Jeff, from up in the passenger seat. It's just empty. It was built recently, but I guess they haven't finished some stuff, like the wiring and the locks. I wondered why anyone would build a new home out in the middle of nowhere. There was nothing but trees lining the road we'd been on, and it was a long road. I was relieved to hear that the house was new, since abandoned houses are usually decrepit and falling apart. They reminded me of places you should never go, places where horrible things lurk in the corners and under creaky floorboards. And let's not forget splintery wood and nails jutting out in all directions, just waiting to pierce drunk teens in the darkness. In the back seat with me were two alternative hippie girls. I think it was the first time I'd met them, but I'm not sure. Some people are memorable, whilst others are just people. Mike and Jeff were probably trying to hook up with them, but I doubt they'd succeed. Oh my god, this is gonna be so cool, one of the girls proclaimed, whilst the other giggled. Cool, huh? I wasn't convinced. I suppose when you're an outgoing person in a place with little excitement, you'd have to travel to empty houses in the middle of nowhere to get your kicks. As for me, outgoing wasn't my thing. When we finally pulled up to the house, the first thing I noticed was the uneven ground all around it. Nothing says unfinished home like piles of dirt, unfilled holes, and a view of the foundation. At least the architecture was nice and simple. It was basically like a quasi-modernist rectangle with a lot of tall windows. I was always jealous of my friends who had modern homes. My parents had to be different and go with the country charm. Once both drivers shut off their headlights, all I saw was black. We filed out of the cars, and a couple of people with flashlights led the way up to the house.
"Oh, shit!"
Someone shouted. It was Melanie, the one girl I had actually talked to a little before. She must have rode in the other car because she used to go out with Mike, and now things were a little uncomfortable between them. I didn't really know the guys in the other car, but at least I knew Mike and Jeff, and I guess Melanie.
"Watch out for those holes, guys. I just stepped in one and flipping almost broke my foot."
The girls guided Melanie the rest of the way up to the sliding glass door where Mike opened it, and we went inside. Inside, it was your typical upper-middle-class Long Island home. The walls were blank white, devoid of any fancy trim, with that shiny wood flooring that doesn't quite look real. There was a kitchen to the left, and a huge room to the right with a 2-story ceiling. The front wall consisted mostly of large paneless windows, while the back wall was solid and bare. Stairs led up to a 2nd story, complete with an indoor balcony. In the far corner of the room was the only furniture, a ratty couch and a broken armchair that both looked like they came from a junkyard. They sat in front of a fireplace with small stacks of paper strewn around them. By the looks of it, someone had been squatting here. I assumed it was Mike and his friends. "Why is there furniture here?" I asked Mike. "I don't know. It was here when we found the place. The rest of the house is totally empty. Those papers weren't here before, though." "That's so weird," was my typical response to unusual things. The last thing I wanted to find at the house was something unusual. Without the flashlights, it was too dark to see, and I hate being in unfamiliar places in the dark. At least our voices echoing throughout the house gave me a little bit of comfort. It felt like everyone was close by at all times. One of the guys I didn't know called us to the kitchen to smoke weed. We were using a really short pipe, and I ended up burning my nose with the lighter. We all burst into hysterics, which lifted the little bit of tension I was feeling. I always seem to do something funny by mistake when hanging out in a group. Perhaps that's why this particular gang of misfits liked having me around. After we lit up, a few of the girls started exploring the house. Intimidated by the darkness, I decided to hang out by the fireplace where Jeff was making a fire. Not having a flashlight made me nervous, and the light from the fire was a fair substitute. I sat in the cruddy armchair, sipping a beer as Jeff was checking out the newspapers. "What is all this stuff?" I asked. "Oh no, some kind of medical stuff? Look," he replied, handing me a few sheets. They looked like pages torn from medical journals, diagrams of human anatomy and such. Maybe they were photocopies, but in the dim light of the fire it was hard to tell. It was odd that someone would bring so many random papers to an empty house in the middle of nowhere, especially if it was a squatter. "I figured these would be someone writing in a book or something," I said. "That's what I thought. Maybe someone came here to study? This is a really weird place to study. Then just leave it all here? Creepy, huh?" "Kinda," I said sarcastically. By this point I was getting pretty bored. Sitting on trashy furniture surrounded by stacks of mysterious papers in a dark house with people I didn't really know that well. I've only mentioned Mike and Jeff by name because I can't remember anyone else's, except for Melanie. She was as creeped out by the Montauk project as I was, so we bonded a little. I could hear her voice from the 2nd floor as she and the other girls were getting excited about something. They hurried down the stairs, with Melanie having a jumbo-sized sheet of paper.
"Guys, check this out! It's so freaky!" she elated, holding up some sort of crude drawing. It was the outline of a child in black marker. I recalled making those drawings in elementary school. A kid would lay down, and another would trace their entire body with magic marker or crayon. Only in this case, the hands had been colored in red. Jeff was the first to say, "What the fuck?" But we were both thinking it. The mysterious papers were bad enough, but now a mysterious drawing. For a moment I wondered if some of the guys were playing a practical joke. "It was in one of the rooms upstairs," said Melanie. "All the rooms were completely empty except for this."
She, along with her two friends, seemed playfully frightened. The kind of frightened you would expect from someone watching a scary movie they know isn't real. Regardless of the odd nature of the drawing, it was the only interesting thing that happened since we got there. The weirdest part is the hands being read, I said. It's so weird. Right? Jeff concurred.
I want to take it home.
Why? I asked. It's fucking scary. Why is it even here? We had fun coming up with explanations, which helped me forget how disturbing it was. Maybe some kids were hanging out in the house and made it, but we couldn't figure out why they would have brought a huge piece of paper. Then we thought it could have been made in school, and someone brought it to the house. Still, none of our theories could eliminate its somewhat sinister presence. Mike and the others came over to see what we were doing. Soon we were all discussing the fate of the drawing. Melanie seemed to like it, but the rest of us were more superstitious. Our excuses for the existence started getting silly, as you might expect from a group of inebriated teenagers. What if it was made by a ghost? We shouldn't touch it. Maybe there's a ghost of a little kid living here, and that's why no one's moved in yet. Somebody probably cut off his hands, and that's why they're red. Once we ran through every ghost story cliché we could think of, we came to the consensus that the drawing would stay. Melanie laid it on the armchair to make it look like it was sitting. The other girls were going up to the roof, and Melanie asked me to come. I'm afraid of heights, remember? I was hoping that would be enough to make her leave me alone. Last time we went up to the roof, I swore I'd never do it again.
Come on, you've just been sitting here the whole time. Besides, the roof is really cool. You can't fall off unless you try.
I gave in and followed her up to the second floor. We squeezed through an opening onto the roof where the other girls were smoking a bowl. The middle was flat, surrounded on all sides by upward slants. My fear didn't come into play, which was a pleasant surprise. It was probably the coolest hangout roof I'd seen. While the girls and I laughed over nonsense, Melanie walked up one of the slants to peek so she could look down.
Melanie, don't fall,
the girls said, almost in unison.
Oh, shut up, I'm not going to fall,
Melanie grumbled, shining a flashlight around. For a minute, she was silent, then asked,
Can someone come here for a sec?
One of the girls went up to join her, and Melanie pointed to an area in front of the house.
Isn't that where we parked?
The five of us went downstairs, and Melanie approached Mike and his friends.
Did you guys move the cars? I didn't see them from the roof.
Mike replied with a confused, drawn-out, No? As he turned around to look out the windows. He tried shining a flashlight, but it reflected off the glass. They all went outside and immediately started swearing. The cars weren't in front of the house. After circling the entire perimeter, it was confirmed that they were gone. Are you fucking kidding me? Mike yelled, his voice disappearing into the sky. I started to wonder again if some kind of joke was being played. Maybe one of the guys moved the cars down the road and then walked back, just to freak everyone out. No one heard them start up, though. Okay, who moved the cars? The other driver asked. I hadn't had much contact with him, and he seemed a little high-strung, so I was slightly freaked out by the possibility that he might be aggressive. I didn't. Did you? Mike said, looking at Jeff. No, dude, I wouldn't move your car, let alone both of them. Seriously, guys, this isn't cute, the guy said. I want to know if someone stole my fucking car, or if any of you guys are playing a fucking joke. I could tell this guy wasn't going to put up with any shenanigans. Mike and Jeff were caught a little off guard when they were being accused. Someone suggested to do a pocket check, and it turned out they still had the keys to both vehicles. This doesn't make sense, said Jeff, as we all started murmuring. This time it wasn't any fun to figure out the mystery. How did two cars just disappear? The girls were crying now. Well, not Melanie. The guys were cursing up a storm, especially the driver from the second car. I've decided to dub him Angry Guy. Not that his anger wasn't justified, it was just the most prominent trait. I had nothing to contribute to the conversation, so I just waited for everyone else to figure out what we were going to do. The only thing that mattered to me was getting home sometime in the next century. It took a while to face reality, as unbelievable as it was, and eventually we started walking home. Everyone was silent. The only sound came from our footsteps and the twitter of crickets. There was just enough moonlight to see the barren trees arcing over the road. It was going to take a few hours to get anywhere that had streetlights, and we were all exhausted. Angry Guy was walking ahead. No one wanted to be near him, afraid he would blow up again once everyone was getting cranky from walking so far. Not that we could blame him.
"Hey, can we stop for a minute?"
asked one of the girls. We collectively agreed it was a good idea, even though we'd only been walking for about 20 minutes. There was a sense of denial that we were still so far from home. Jeff packed a bowl and we passed it around. As everyone waited for their turn in the cipher, we talked about what to do when we got home. Jeff suggested going to the police, as if that wasn't obvious. Mike started spewing some crap about how he knew people who could track down the cars, like they were the A-team or something. Angry Guy didn't say anything. I just wanted to go home. "Did everyone get a hit?" Jeff asked, making sure no one got shafted. As everyone looked at each other and nodded, the girls noticed something.
"Hey, where's Melanie?"
Suddenly, everyone realized that she wasn't there. The flashlight holders scanned the area, but there was only trees and a dirt road. We each called her name several times, but it just echoed into the night air.
"This isn't funny, guys. Where's Melanie?"
We spread out a little, continuing to call her name. If she was playing a joke on us, it was in enormously poor taste. Everyone was frustrated and bewildered by the vanishing cars, and this wasn't helping. "Fuck!" Mike shouted. "Where the fuck is she? We can't keep going if we don't know where she is." "Dude, let's just leave her," one guy joked.
"Are you stupid?"
shouted one of the girls.
"She's our friend. We're not leaving her in the middle of nowhere."
"Maybe she went back to the house?" I suggested. Everyone stopped talking for a moment, contemplating the possibility that she did indeed go back. I wasn't really serious, though. What idiot would go back to the house without telling us? And why? After more cursing, grumbling, and arguing, we decided that a few of us would go back to the house whilst the others waited in case Melanie really was messing with us. If she was, then she just lost some friends. I volunteered to go, since waiting for an unknown length of time seemed worse in that moment. On the way back to the house, the two girls, Mike and myself, discussed the whole situation. We had come to an empty house in the middle of nowhere to party, only for our transportation to vanish, and we couldn't explain it. Mike came up with his theory that the cars disappearing was some sick joke, and that Melanie was in on it. He implied that she got some guys who could hotwire cars to drive them away, so we would have to walk home. Then she ran back to the house and they picked her up. The girls seemed offended, but they were tired of defending her, so they just shrugged it off. As we finally arrived back at the house, my stomach dropped upon seeing it. I cursed myself for volunteering to come back. I guess I wanted to know sooner than later if Melanie was okay. Approaching the sliding glass door, we were surprised to see it was open. "Did we leave the door open?" asked Mike. "I'm almost positive someone closed it," I replied. If there was any reason for it to be open, it had to be that Melanie went back inside. As we entered the main room, the house felt emptier than before. I noticed that a lot of medical papers were in the fireplace, and the contour drawing of the child with the red hands was gone. We searched the kitchen whilst calling for Melanie. It was clear she wasn't on the first floor, so we headed upstairs. "I'm going to be so pissed if she's not here," said Mike. "'Cause then we came back for nothing." The girls just ignored him and went to search rooms, while I split off to check the roof. The window was still open, and I squeezed through. If I expected her to be anywhere, it was here. The roof was empty and silent, with a gentle breeze blowing. I could almost see over the treetops, which made me feel stronger than my fear of the darkness. For a moment, I forgot we were looking for Melanie, until I heard the girls panicking inside. I quickly squeezed back through the window and ran to see what was up. Mike and the girls were looking at something in one of the empty rooms. "What happened?" I asked. Mike shone the flashlight at a spot on the floor. Reluctantly, I approached and looked down as the girls gripped each other, sobbing. There were 2 jumbo-sized sheets of paper, taped together to make one larger sheet. Drawn in marker was the outline of a girl, with only the hands colored in red. The House of White Noise by Noctivois. Silence is subjective. It's amazing how our upbringings can distort our perception of silence. They determine the volume that lulls us into a false sense of isolation. If you grew up in a big city, you'll have fallen asleep to a backdrop of distant cars and pedestrians, thinking it's quiet. You'll be so accustomed to the ambience that you won't even notice the honks and shouts coming from the streets. It'll all blend into the white noise of the night. Likewise, if you were raised in the countryside, you will have blotted out the subtle chirps of the crickets and the howls of the wolves in the distance, drifting off amongst the insects and apparent bliss. We need this isolation to fall asleep at night, because when we feel isolated, we can let our minds roam free, able to create whatever we want within the confines of our own subconscious. My mother taught me that fact, and I never forgot it. In past years, I have tried to experiment with it wherever I went. I'd listen for the subtle sounds of the environment, realizing that she was right. Now, though, I find myself looking back and wishing I had listened to her more. My childhood was one of the latter. I was raised in the Pennsylvania Highlands, on a huge estate, at least a mile away from any other families. It was truly isolated. My house was a huge colonial mansion with 2 stories. It stood overlooking a bleak, mud-covered valley, with a faint view of a pine forest in the distance. Faded pillars lined the sides, converging with the unpainted wooden walls, occasionally lightened up by the off-white windowsills. It was always an intimidating sight from the outside for my younger self, even after living in it for several years. Apparently, they bought the estate in the late 1930s. My mother always used to say to me that she always regretted it. It was old and worn and chipped and rotted from the inside out, and my father always promised to fix it, but never did. But there was one reason she stayed: the silence. You can't possibly understand what it was like to live in that house. Normally, in the countryside, you'd expect there to be a constant, if subtle, background noise. The fluttering of a moth's wings, the rustling of grass, the creak of the house settling on its foundation. But there was none of that, somehow. It was absolutely, hypnotizingly silent. Even if I described it to you, you wouldn't be able to replicate how quiet it was. You could just hear your own heartbeat at any given time. You could hear everyone else's, even if they were 3 rooms over. I can't tell you how many times I was kept up at night by the harshness of my own breathing. If someone stepped on a wayward floorboard during the night, you'd be sure my parents would be on top of them. And yet, somehow, it was natural to have the total absence of any sound. We never had any sort of electronic device, apart from a telephone, which was sort of a necessity. We didn't want the extra noise disturbing our peaceful lives. My parents were a quiet bunch. You know the type. The ones who keep their children locked away in their homes, without video games or mobile phones or anything to distract them from becoming their perfect little students. And like those kids that seem to be popping up more and more often, I had no friends growing up. It was only until I went off to college at 17 that I was able to really mingle with my own kind. That was where I met Matthias.
He was a city boy, having grown up in the Bronx in New York. He was sweet, sensitive, and had a body to kill for. We were the cutest couple you'd ever seen. Still are. Long story short, I never went back to my Pennsylvania house. I talked with my family on the phones occasionally, but never got to see them in person. Eventually I graduated and got engaged to Matthias, leaving my past behind and venturing into the city for our new life. At first the noise kept me up at night. My mother had been right about the effect of living in the countryside, and what it would have on me when I moved somewhere else. All the sirens and subways were too much to bear. She never wanted me to leave. My father had always been indifferent to most of my feelings. My mother was caring, nurturing. She taught me everything I know, homeschooled me with the supplies passed down from her own parents. I owed her so much. But life has a way of punishing the best of us. I could tell before I left that she was starting to lose herself. She was no longer the excited, wide-eyed persona I grew up with. Her conversations with me were brief and void of emotion, and she no longer lit up at my presence. I think the silence, combined with her husband's indifference, was slowly eating away at her. As my young, selfish self, I looked at my poor mother and told myself I wouldn't end up like her. At one point along the way, my father divorced my mother for reasons I never found out, and left with nearly everything they had one night, driving away in the family car and never looking back. I don't think she was ever quite the same after that. After Matt and I moved into the city, we would get calls now and then from my mother, who still lived in the house. She would speak to me in a soft voice and tell me that she was looking forward to my visit. I'd tell her I never said I'd visit, and in fact that I didn't want to go back. I loved the bright lights and big dreams that lit up the New York nights. But she'd just chuckle and move on, saying how she missed me dearly. This went on for about 3 years. During that time, her calls became less and less frequent, and during each, her voice became more and more unintelligible. Her speech started to slur, and she broke into a habit of repeating herself every minute or so. Eventually, she lost the ability to piece together coherent sentences. Over those 3 years, I watched a woman endure the passage of time through the telephone. Soon the calls decreased to once a month, then once every 2 months, then once every 4, and gradually they disappeared altogether. Matt and I went through several jobs and several heartbreaks. We loved each other and punished each other for our love, but we persisted, and soon I learned to forget my lonely upbringing and move on. 2 weeks ago, my mother called again. It was a chilly New York evening. Matt and I were taking a break from a big fight, and I was drying my tears in my bedroom, listening to the steady silence of the streets below. I picked up the phone as soon as it rang, silently hoping it would be her. Hello?
Honey? That you? Veronica?
My name's Victoria, Mom. You know that, I said through the tears, struggling to maintain my chapped smile.
You don't need to. Too loud.
Her voice was interrupted by a harsh, raspy cough.
Visit me soon.
Mom, I've told you already, I don't want to go back. I love you, but I just can't. I sighed. This was the worst I'd heard her.
Too loud!
A sudden yell made me jump. I heard her panting on the other end.
Stop. Scream.
Mom? I wiped new, guilt-driven tears from my face. Mom, I'm not screaming. But I'm sorry. I'll speak more softly.
Screaming!
She shrieked, exhaling loudly, almost as if she had her mouth pressed up against the receiver.
Noise! Too many! Too loud!
Her breathing seemed to calm down. Mom, are you okay?
Veronica,
she whispered at this point.
stay on.
I'll stay on if you need me to,
I assured. Something was wrong. Her condition was worsening to the point where she could no longer speak.
Stay on.
Her speech was cut off by an abrupt buzzing noise, like if someone had turned on the radio to a dead station.
Mom? I can barely hear you. Mom?
I yelled into the phone. I could hear Matthias in the other room, shifting his position on the couch to hear me. I heard a clatter from the other end. Through the huge noise, I could barely make out my mom in the distance, shrieking.
Quiet! Stop! Too many! Stop!
The noise overpowered her screams until it reached a point where my ears began to ring.
Mom!
The call cut off abruptly. I dropped the phone and let my head fall into my cupped hands, more tears streaming down my face. All I could hear were the car horns and subway trains clattering below. The guilt of all those years I refused to travel back to that house rushed back to me all in that one moment. I was trying so hard to make a new life for myself that I forgot to look back at the woman who gave me the one I have now. The next call I got was 5 days later. It was to identify the body. If you have ever lost a loved one, you know the sound of agony. It's a deep, guttural screech that pours every emotion you've ever felt into one incomprehensibly painful expression of mourning. It is the single most terrifying sound a human can make. I don't think I've ever screamed as hard as I did when I saw the body for the first time. The mailman found her body lying half outside the front door. Her throat had been slit in several places, dried blood oozing out of the wrinkled skin. Her hands covered in tiny scars, the results of years of unchecked self-harm. I never bothered to check in on her after I'd left, and now I was seeing her in this mangled state, exacted by her own hand. I couldn't help but feel like it was my hand too. Not many people attended the funeral, unsurprisingly. Nobody was there apart from some distant cousins. During the time I had listened to over the phone, I came to learn that my mother was unpredictable in her old age, and unpredictable in death too. When the time came to read her will, I didn't expect much. My father had taken mostly everything of value in the home, so I was completely caught off guard when they announced she'd left me the house. I didn't know how to react. To be truthful, I had become tired of the city life over the course of the past few months. Matt had too, and after we'd made up from our fight, we agreed we should try to look for someplace else. I looked at him, and he looked at me. All the guilt inside me wanted to forfeit. I didn't deserve this, after I'd left my poor mother alone to die. But now I realized all I wanted was silence. So I said yes. I should have listened to the guilt, like I'd listened to the noise on the phone, standing by as she destroyed herself. We pulled up to the driveway on the Tuesday of the following week. As our car crawled up the unpaved driveway, the gravel crunched harshly under us. We got out and unloaded the luggage from the trunk. It was then when I finally forced myself to look upon the old house. It was somehow even more imposing than it had been when I was a child. Vines sprawled up its walls like veins, writhing and weaving all around the structure. The wood was old and warped, with several rotten marks and sharp edges. Matt and I approached the door in trepidation. He let one of the suitcases drop out of his hand and pulled the door open. It was exactly as I remembered it. The pale, mildew-stained wallpaper gave way to the tall, winding staircase, old and creaking. To the right was the kitchen, to the left, the dining room,
then the family room, then the living room. But for some reason, that sense of home was missing. As I pointed out the locations to my husband, I suddenly felt the urge to run up and down the stairs as I once did as a kid. Having finished with the first floor, I led him up to the second. Instinctively, I looked to the left into my mother's old room. It looked just as ornate and strangely welcoming as it had when I was still home. The bed was neat and folded. The pale green sheets tilted slightly to the side, just as she had always left them. I peeked in curiously, expecting subconsciously to see my mother standing there, smiling, gesturing for me to hug her. I was visibly disappointed when all I saw was a room that was empty. We set up in my old bedroom and left the rest of the packing for the next day. That night we had the best sex we'd had in years, but unlike Matt, I couldn't sleep afterwards. I still felt that resonating guilt for abandoning my mother in her time of need. This was her house. The silence I had come to know and love seemed somehow even more devoid than before. The next morning I was awakened by the gravel crunching and the sound of the doorbell. I rushed downstairs in my bathrobe and opened the door. Waiting there was the mailman, with a thin beige envelope in his hands. "Morning, miss," he said. I rubbed my eyes. "You're," suddenly realizing, "you're the one who found her, aren't you?" The man sighed. Yes, I am. You're her daughter, I guess?" I nodded. "I'm sorry for your loss. She was such a funny woman, you know. Every day she'd come out the door and greet me, always striking up a conversation. Always said I looked like some Hollywood star I'd never heard of." He chuckled to himself. "Seemed like such a nice old lady. Can't believe..." He stopped himself. "She was." I smiled, ignoring the sentence he had begun to say. The mailman cleared his throat. "Well, I was hoping it would be better news than this, but unfortunately I've come to deliver you your bills for the month." He handed them over. "Since you're now the official owners of this estate, I'm afraid you'll have to take over where she left off." He handed me the envelope. Okay, fair enough." I shook his hand and closed the door, opening the form and analyzing the contents. I frowned. Something was wrong. I dashed out the door and held up the letter, waving to the mailman who was about to pull out in his car. "What's the matter?" he yelled. I walked over the coarse drive with my slippers, showing him the electricity bill. "This says we owe over $400 for the electric. There are barely any things in the house that run on electricity. This can't be right." "Sorry, miss, but I'm not an electrician. Don't shoot the messenger," he replied, shouting over the engine. I sighed and walked back inside, hearing the mailman's car trundle along the rocky drive. Matt was just waking up and was now descending the staircase. "What's with the commotion, Vic?" He yawned. I showed him the bill. His eyes widened. $400? What the fuck? I know, right? There can't be anything in here that uses that much juice. It's just the phone, the lights, the fridge, that's it. "Maybe your mother had some giant Frankenstein lab built in her house or something," he joked. I punched him in the side. "Ow! Fuck! Okay, I'm sorry." We tossed the bill aside and sat down for breakfast. Over the next week, Matt and I settled in. We didn't talk much during the nights, even though I wanted to talk about so many things. He wanted to consider our future, but I didn't want to think about that just yet. Fights broke out, but we still always made up afterwards. I'd like to think it was me that was causing so much unnecessary tension between us, but I knew it was the empty space in my life that plagued me. I just couldn't stop thinking about her. And the silence. I expected it to flow through my open arms as soon as I entered the house, but it felt cold, like it was a different force entirely. Sure, there was no sound,
but it seemed like there was still some tiny, persistent detail keeping me from truly being comfortable. It was on our 13th day in the house that I was able to pinpoint what was wrong. "What do you mean buzzing?"
Can you hear it? It's faint.
Matt and I were seated on our bed, having just completed another unsuccessful night of lovemaking. Lately, nothing had been working. Neither of us could really ever get there. I had my index finger in the air for emphasis.
But it's there. Definitely there. It sounds like...
I froze. What? Sounds like what? Thoughts raced in my head. I flashed back to the night in the apartment, getting that final call from my mother.
It sounds like static. White noise. Like a radio left untuned.
I stopped and got up, following the distant noise. It was coming from my mother's bedroom.
"Come on!"
I gestured for my husband to follow. He reluctantly got up and strolled over to the doorway.
"Think about it. It would make perfect sense. She left some sort of radio or TV on before she died and never turned it off. It would explain our electric bill."
I stepped into the room and listened intently.
"Shh. It's coming from here somewhere."
I moved towards the bed in the corner, briefly thinking for a moment my mother was sleeping in it. Snapping out of my trance, I leaned against the backboard and listened. The buzz was coming from behind it.
"Help me move this,"
I called to Matt. Together, we lifted the bed and pushed it out of the way. For a moment, I felt triumphant in discovering the source of the issue. But the moment was shattered when I saw what was behind it. The wall was boarded with a large square of plywood, hastily nailed with uneven accuracy. Around it was a thin coat of dry rot, which was causing it to slip out of its position, and on it were 2 words, written with blackened blood. "Stay on." "We need to call the police," Matt insisted.
"Are you kidding me?"
I stumbled back in shock.
"No, we have to get in there."
Tears began forming in my eyes.
"This could tell us why she killed... Whatever she locked away in there, she meant for us to see it."
"Vic, look at it." He pointed at the bloody writing. "Does that look like an invitation to you?" I exhaled in exasperation. Nothing about this was right. But I needed to know something. Anything that would explain why she did it.
"We have to."
I turned to face the board and tore it off, splinters shredding through my fingertips.
Fuck!
Behind the hall was a hidden room, about 12 feet in diameter. The walls were clean and looked like they had just been freshly painted. Unlike the rest of the house, the white here was not intermingled with brown splotches of rot. It was like a mirror. In the center of the room was a simple wooden stool, upon which lay an old television from the 1930s. Its red wooden case was polished and neat, without so much as a scratch. On the television screen was static. Something inside me was unsettled by the noise being produced. It represented a disorder, a hole in my life that deserved to be filled. Because of this television, I couldn't experience the silence I embraced as a child. It wasn't home without it. I needed to turn it off. "Vic, I don't think that's a good idea," Matt called as I moved my hands towards the switch. As I approached the set, I could see the wood casing, dust-free and almost lustrous compared to the rest of the house. The noise from the dead channel became louder and louder, shrieking perpetually. I turned to face the screen. Dotted pixels danced around the curved glass, dancing in tune with the void. Through the whites and blacks and greys, I wanted there to be something. And then I saw her face. She was there, staring at me from behind the glass barrier. My mother,
face stretched in shock and apparent terror at something I couldn't see. My arms began to shake as I reached out to the switch. Behind the screen, her mouth stood agape, as if she was trying to scream out of the false silence that surrounded her. And as my eyes locked with hers, I could see, deep within, one emotion. Pain. "Vic, are you okay?" I turned to look at Matt, who was staring at me with a bewildered expression on his face. I looked back at the screen to find the mess of monochromatic pixels, lost between channels. There was nothing to be seen beyond. I sighed at the thought that my mind was playing tricks on me and pulled the switch. The static mess shrunk into the center, collapsing into a thin bar and then fading into black. I could feel it in an instant. The silence washed over me like a thick syrup. No noise, no input from the outside world. The nothingness flowed through my eardrums and out into my body in a blissful stream. I let my hair fall back against the old wooden floor and laughed. "It's finally quiet again," I grinned. "God almighty, it's quiet again." I turned and smirked at my loving husband. "What exactly were you afraid would happen?" Matt shrugged, blushing. "I don't know. You hear all these stories about..." A thump echoed off the walls of the room. I lifted my head and turned to face Matt. I took one look at his fearful expression and knew it wasn't from him. Another dull thump, this time coming from behind me. I swung around to see nothing but the same blank, clean wall that had been there since the house was built. "What the fuck is that?" Matt hissed. "I don't know. There could be an animal in the walls, or..." Two successive thumps rang out from the sides of the room. The two of us held our breaths in trepidation, expecting something to burst through the wallpaper at any moment. After a minute of no further noises, we exhaled simultaneously. Suddenly, the silence was no longer welcoming. After so much time living there, I never heard the place make so much as a whistle in the wind. I wanted to pull myself to my feet and get out of that room, but both Matt and I stayed firmly locked in place, frozen by fear. "We should turn the TV back on, Vic," Matt whispered. I processed the comment and was about to rebuke when another louder thump from above made my heart jump out through my stomach. Without warning, the room was filled with the sounds of repeated hits from behind the wall, ceiling, and floor. It was as though someone was pelting every side of us with huge, meaty rocks. The thumping increased in volume until it sounded similar to gunfire. Every direction was flooded with the storm of kicks and punches. Both of us were paralyzed in place. Every fiber of my being was yelling at me to get up and run, but I just knelt, gazing in terror at the unnaturally clean walls that threatened to give way to whatever horrifying creatures lay behind it. And then, all at once, the source of the noise started screaming. If you've ever lost a loved one, you know the sound of agony. It's a deep, guttural screech that pours every emotion you've ever felt into one incomprehensibly painful expression of mourning. It is the single most terrifying sound a human can make. These were not screams of agony. These were something far, far worse. Words cannot describe the terror I experienced, knelt down on that cold, splinter-ridden floor, surrounded by the piercing, unholy noises. Matt was crying hysterically and covering his head with his shaky, sweaty hands. Above the cacophony of tormented screeching, I could faintly hear him shout, "Turn the TV on! Turn the fucking thing back on!" As the cries grew louder, penetrating my body and ringing through my ears, I mustered the strength to lift my arm. I saw the switch and pointed desperately towards it, willing my body to break itself free of its paralysis and reach it. And as the white noise culminated in a final, singular bellow, I flipped the television set on. Instantly, the walls ceased their roaring. My ears were ringing as I realized the night was silent once again. Slowly, the steady drone of the static brought me back to my senses, and I pulled myself up to face my husband. Matt rushed to my side and gazed at the television in the center of the room, still perched on its stool. Slowly, we walked towards the crack in the wall, and after looking back one last time, put the thought of what happened out of our heads. We were never really the same after that. Matt started having night terrors, which he said he hadn't experienced since he was a kid. He claimed he didn't want to hurt me by accident, so he moved to a separate bedroom where he's been ever since. The silence of the house was never again as comforting as it had been all those years ago. Just a little girl, isolated from the rest of the world in bliss. Now I knew what was hiding behind it this entire time. Though we never experienced the screaming again, I keep wishing for there to be some sound to break the silence. It's cold, penetrating, and totally unforgiving. I keep thinking back to what my mother used to say to me. Silence is subjective. It changes depending on where we live, how we live. Our upbringings determine the volume that lulls us into a false sense of isolation. We need it to fall asleep at night, so we can let our minds roam free, able to create whatever we want within the confines of our own subconscious. I'd like to say that the screams drove her to do what she did, but I know it was the silence that killed her. And I know it's the silence that, in the end, claims us all.
The Dark House by Stalker Shrike. There was a boom from the bell in the clock tower, and then a mechanical buzzing. X195, the loudspeaker crackled. Please report to the chapel. There was sobbing, cries of fear, voices pleading far off down the hallway. Tom just curled up in his bunk. He hadn't known Christian well, but even if he had, there was nothing he could do for him. The voices continued. Then there was a scream of pain, footsteps running, a door slamming. Tom closed his eyes. He didn't want to think about it. His phone buzzed. "Don't worry," the text said. "You will be all right." "You don't know that," he typed back. "It could well be my number they call next." "Shh. Have no fear. I will protect you. Simply continue to communicate with me, and no one will harm you." "But how do I know?" "Hush now. Time for sleep. Pay no attention to the sounds you hear." A wegabwegwe. Tom sighed, put the phone down. No arguing with him. He knew best, after all. So he curled up and slept and ignored the screams of agony that filtered through the halls and vents from the dark vastness of the chapel. Tom was one of those who had been there the longest. Well, time didn't mean much in the dark house. The harsh electric lights never stopped their flickering, and very few of them remembered concepts like windows or the outdoors. Time was measured primarily in comings and goings. Comings were frequent. One child, maybe two, maybe even 3 at a time, generally between 5 and 10 years old. There was a quarantine period in the closed-off portion of the infirmary, and then they would be assigned a number and a phone, and one of the little cells that somehow always seemed to be available. Goings were rarer, but they did still happen. The loudspeakers would call your number if you misbehaved, or if they wanted you for something. But if they summoned you to the chapel, alone, that was it. No one knew what they did to you. All anyone knew was that there were a few extra bloodstains on the altar the next time service was called. Tom had stopped keeping track of the comings and goings by this point, as had many of the others. They had all just sort of stopped caring. When the loudspeakers announced a meal, you went and ate. When they announced a service, you went and prayed. When they announced a lesson, you went and recited the same things you recited every time. The rest of the time, you just slept, or wandered the halls, or sat in one of the little common rooms and talked to him. He was the one thing they all had in common. None of them remembered their lives before the dark house, although some of them had nightmares. But they knew there was something beyond it. There must be. And he was proof of that. He was the tether binding them all to the idea that there was something more. The bell tolled, the loudspeaker buzzed. All to the dining hall, it crackled, and Tom joined the growing river of children that flowed through the mad labyrinthian tunnels. Up and down pointless staircases, around door-lined roundabouts, over narrow bridges across stone-walled chasms, with more people moving down there beneath. And then the dining hall, an unknowingly mammoth chamber, its arched ceiling more than lost in the blackness, pale blue lights hanging from unguessable amounts of cable over the endless tables, the thousands of children still leaving the place looking desolate and empty. He made his way to a table, picked at grey porridge. Clarissa was there, and Sean, and they made small talk as they ate. Apparently there had been a new arrival before Christian had gone to the chapel. A pair of twins, the rumour said. None of them really cared, but none of them wanted to talk about Christian either. And that was the only thing that had happened recently. Eventually, they just ate in silence, listening to the subdued murmur of the rest of the hall and trying to ignore the constant feeling that there were cameras up in the darkness watching them. Someone was always watching them. You never saw them, except as the occasional shadowy figure watching from a corner. But they were there. You could feel them, eyes both flesh and glass, always staring. Privacy was a joke, secrets a myth. You might be able to hide something from another child, but you couldn't hide anything from the watchers. Anything at all. Tom was sitting on his bunk when his phone buzzed again. He was half tempted to ignore it. He was tired. He really didn't feel like talking to him right now, but of course he read it anyway. There has been a new arrival. I heard something about that, yeah. Twins, right? Do not speak to them. That was a bit odd. Okay. This is very important, Tom. Do not, under any circumstances, attempt to communicate with the new arrivals. Do not interact with them unless absolutely necessary. Do you understand? Yeah, but why? Because I said so. You trust me, don't you, Tom? Of course. Then trust me about this as well. Pio cuore. Of course he trusted him. Why wouldn't he trust him? Tom had known him for as long as he could remember, and he had never spoken to these twins. It was confusing, but he knew best. He always did. Everyone else seemed to have similar messages, and gradually the twins became a sort of forbidden subject. Everyone was interested in them, but no one wanted to talk about them. Certainly no one was going to talk to them when they came out of quarantine. But everyone wanted to know about them, and why he refused to discuss them. Then the service was called. The chapel was smaller than the dining hall, but not by much. Countless pews stretched from the door down the altar to the far end, in a single smooth stretch that contrasted with the weird misshapenness of the rest of the room. Behind the altar, a flat, pale wall stretched upwards, acres in size, so tall that even when you entered the high end of the room, you still had to look up to see the top. The rest of the space was deformed, a deformed cavern, lumps of greenish stone, looking like ghostly hills into the flickering light of 1,000 candles that stood before the altar, and vast black hollows yawning like inky lakes, somehow suspended up there in the distance. They always knew whether or not everyone was there. Sometimes you would have to wait outside for hours for the last few people to trickle in. This time, though, everyone was so on edge that it took only a few minutes for the doors to grind shut. And as always, when they boomed closed, the projector began to whir. The projector made full use of that vast, empty wall. A slideshow began, dead silent, black and white images and text stuttering and flickering. Ordinarily, it would simply be a call to prayer, encouraging the viewers to worship him and fear the one below. And it was still that, in a sense. But it was different somehow. More intense. His word is law, it said, and flickering images that went by too fast to see. His wish is his children's command. When he speaks, his children listen, and they obey. This is the way of the true believers. The one below awaits to swallow those who do not believe, and its servants are everywhere. They are the small crack in the wall, the small tear in the cloth. They will appear harmless, but they wait to steal the unwary from his caring arms and bring them to their master's ravening jaws. The twins were almost mythical when they finally emerged. Most people seemed to expect them to have horns or bat wings to swoop grinning down upon non-believers. In reality, they were ordinary children, a boy and a girl, who kept to themselves and didn't speak to anyone except each other. Even so, people avoided them. They trusted the services, and they trusted him. It was some time later that Tom awoke to the buzzing of his phone. He picked it up, yawning, wondering what he could want. Usually he knew whether they were asleep or not. It took him a moment to comprehend the message on the screen. Timothy. Excuse me? Amanda. What's going on? Juan. Why are you listing names? Am I missing something? Fran, Jeremiah, Noah, Sam. What are you doing? Katerina, Leo, Simon, Charlotte, Hugh, Eileen, Arthur, Dorothy, Hannah. I don't understand. Christian. Then he got it. Wait. These are all the ones that got taken. Correct. And you're next on the list, Tom. Come to the chapel, now, before they call you there. He made his sleepy way to the chapel, racking his brain for what his plans was. Did he do this for everyone who was taken? And what was to happen when you got there? Surely he wouldn't be there in person, would he? He wasn't. There were two figures standing there in the half-light. The twins stood before the chapel doors, watching him as he approached. Hello, Tom, the boy said. We're so glad you could make it. Tom stopped, started backing away. I'm not supposed to talk to you. He said so. Did he? I'm not surprised, the boy smiled. Well, we would certainly like to talk to you, Tom. You see, several of your friends have already been here tonight. No, I'm sorry, I'm not talking to you. He was still moving backwards, trying to get away, wondering why the Watchers hadn't stopped this already and intervened. Let me ask you a different question. What do you know about the Dark House? Why do you care? Because I want to know. Fine. It's a place where his followers are safe from the horrors of outside. I see. And who is he? He is our shepherd, the one who keeps us safe. He communicates with us, his children, through the phones. It was him who called me here, right? The boy's smile widened. I think you know the answer to that. How did you? That's not possible. Only he can do that. Evidently not. But we can do a lot more than that. You see, Tom, there is one simple thing that we have that you don't. Knowledge. I know everything I need to. I know that he guides me and guards me. Where to, Tom? Where is he guiding you? To a life spent here, every day the same monotony. To mature into a servitor if they don't sacrifice you to him first, because you do not have knowledge. We can give you that knowledge. I don't need your knowledge. You're servants of the one below. Have you ever been below, Tom? No, of course not. I didn't think so. The boy stepped back, nodding to his sister who took out her phone. 3 days from now, M925 will be called to the chapel. When that happens, meet us here. We'll show you what lies below. And why should I do anything you tell me? Because you're human. They haven't taken that away from you yet. And since you're human, you're curious. You've wondered all the time that you've been here, what happens in the rituals. We can show you that too. They aren't as crafty as they think they are. His sister tapped his shoulder, and he nodded. The cameras will reactivate at any moment now. You must leave, quickly. And above all, you must not tell anyone about this, especially not him. But go now! And almost as one, the twins stepped back into the shadows and were gone. For whatever reason, he never did tell him. He knew he should have, of course. But there was a difference between knowing it and doing it. Besides, he told himself, the twins were insane. They were servants of the one below. Surely he didn't need his help not to fall for their lies. He was still telling himself that as he crept along behind Poppy as she walked sobbing to the chapel. He stayed far enough behind her that he didn't attract her attention. So did the others. Other children, following behind, not acknowledging each other, but understanding that they shared a purpose. Some he knew, others he didn't. But when the doors to the chapel boomed closed, they all moved together into the corridor and found the twins waiting for them. None of them spoke. They all knew why they were there, and sure enough, as one, their phones buzzed, and on them they watched the ritual. None of them could have spoken afterwards. None of them could have done anything but stare at the now blank screens when the screams had stopped and the procession of black-robed figures had left the chapel. They were too busy wondering what was under those black robes, and whether it had been anything to do with the humanoid form they adopted. Wondering what those images that the projector had flashed had meant. Images of things they had never seen. Images of things they didn't want to think about, thrown in hazy monochrome against the wall. Wondering what they had torn from Poppy's back was, and whether it was part of the anatomy of an ordinary human being. Finally, one of the girls spoke. So, what now? Now, we show you what they did, with the ashes, and with the offal. The boy pushed open the door to the church, led them down the long aisle to the platform with the altar at the far end. He jumped across the gap between the two, and his sister followed, and motioned for them to do the same. And they showed them the chutes, invisible from any other angle, that led below. Miles upon miles of slime and stench, leading ever downward until the chutes opened out in a cavernous room filled with slime and bones. There were doors in the side of the room, and more rooms beyond, each dwarfing even the titanic chambers they had eaten and learned and prayed in their whole lives, each with rotting slime on its floor and strange symbols on its walls. They recognized some of the symbols, for they had been in the eerie slideshow that played as the black-robed figures had cut out Poppy's organs and thrown them away. There were other things on those walls. Ribbed mounds, like hoses made from the material itself, running from room to room. Flickering lights of colors and scale that implied unpleasant things about the creatures that built them. Great wheels, turning and turning behind massive grates. Other less describable things, clearly technology and equally clearly of no purpose for human beings. And then the final chamber. It was a room that dwarfed all other rooms. It was a room that could fit a small city inside. It was a room that physics would have scoffed at, that would have given an architect nightmares. The passage opened from a pathway up the wall, and they were thankful that they would not have to disturb whatever it was that coated the floor. And in the center was him. They all knew it was him. Their phones hadn't buzzed for the days that they had been trudging through the slime and honeycomb rooms, and the twins had told them that they had been deactivated. Now, they did, all at once, and all with the same message. It is too late. He was a titanic thing, like a heart the size and shape of a mountain. Tendrils hung limply from his flanks, organs of unthinkable function stared like eyes, pulsing veins carried something which was not blood across his gargantuan form. And all across him, the technology that they had been seeing merged and joined, like the hub of a spiderweb the size of a small continent. Pipes and hoses ran with strange fluids, things that should have been cables but weren't, crackled with electricity. It wasn't attached to him. It was him. And through the phones it spoke. You should have never come here. I tried so many times to warn you. But you did not heed my warnings. You ignored them and followed agents of the one below into the dark. The girl glanced at Tom, tapped her brother on the shoulder. He nodded. It's time for us to go.
Wait,
one of the other boys said.
Why did you bring us down here then? Do you really think we can go back to our normal lives after this?
Of course I don't. And that's why we must go.
And you
must stay.
What?
I'm very sorry, my children. I had hoped that it would never come to this, but I am afraid it is time. The thing burst again, but Tom didn't look at it immediately. That was what saved him, and a few of the others. That was why he didn't fall dead to the ground, begin the long, agonizing slide down that foul slope, because most of them looked, and did just that. I'm very sorry, you know, the boy said.
You're sorry?
You bring us down here, destroy everything we've ever known, leave us to die, and the best you can say is you're sorry. He shrugged. I'm afraid so. Tom sank to his knees. Why? The boy smiled. Because you're not the only one who serves a god, Tom. We do too. But we owe him something, Kath and I. He made us. Tom said nothing, just buried his face in his hands. Freaks, they call our kind. We're mutated, though you can't see it from the outside. That's why Kath doesn't speak. It cuts off her vocal cords. And we can hear him in our heads. Hear who? The Kalith entity. The voice. The freak maker. Doesn't matter what you call him. All that matters is that he sent us here. He gave us what we needed to ensure that we got in. There'll be more coming down soon, Tom. Because down here, you can't do what you can do up there. You can't talk to him. And he can't talk to you. You don't remember what happened during the quarantine in the infirmary. Kath and I do. They put things in you. Parasites. It's them he speaks to when he communicates with you. It's them that mature into the servitors. I'm really sorry, but the voice has spoken, and we do not disobey. They tried to go after them as they walked back, and they succeeded for a while, but none of them could make the climb back up when the chutes opened in the walls. They just stood there and watched as the twins scuttled like spiders, and just stood there long after as the empty openings yawned like laughing mouths. When the twins came back down, more children in tow, none of them were left to witness it. They had all given up. One by one, they had picked their way back to his chamber, and once there, they had read his final message. No Trespassing by Cedarley. I hammered the nail through the aluminum sign and into the wooden fence, and then took a step back and briefly admired my work. Hope this keeps those damn kids away, I thought to myself, as I turned towards the short dirt road that led back to my house. As I wearily trudged along the path, I raised my head towards the sky. The stars were beginning to twinkle as the last few rays of sunlight shone over the horizon. The moon was high in the sky and nearly full. It was a beautiful night. I stepped onto my front porch and quickly wiped my shoes on the doormat before heading inside. It had been an exhausting week. Work was becoming more demanding than ever, and kids constantly harassing me at the night was preventing me from sleeping. Though I guess I can't really blame them. It was the same type of mischief I liked to get into when I was a teenager, lurking around haunted houses, making dares with my friends. They were just having some fun. You see, my house is haunted. At least that's the rumor going around the local high schools. I moved in around 3 months ago. I had been looking for a reasonably priced house for quite some time. My old apartment was cramped and run down, and the landlord was a complete arsehole. After I got a significant promotion at work, I figured it was time to take out a mortgage and settle down in a real home. I browsed online ads for months, searching for a place I could afford. Most upscale houses in the suburbs were too expensive. Besides, those kinds of houses are for families. Swimming pools, basketball hoops, block parties. The stuff wasn't for me. I'm a reserved person. Then, just by chance, I saw an ad for this house. It was an old, but in good condition and extremely spacious house, sitting on the outskirts of the city in a quiet, sparsely populated neighborhood. It was the perfect house for me. The best part was the price. It was easily going for less than half of what it was worth. As soon as I saw the ad, I immediately called the real estate agent and expressed my interest in buying. As it turns out, I was the only one who had called about the house. I found this unbelievable. A large, nice house, selling at such a ridiculously low price. How could there be no potential buyers other than myself? The real estate agent explained the house was supposedly haunted. For many years, this house was unoccupied. Then, about 4 years ago, an elderly couple had moved into it. All was fine for a while, until a year ago the couple vanished, never to be seen again. A short police investigation was mounted, but because the couple was so quiet and reserved and had a few acquaintances, there was very little for the police to work with. After the investigation came up cold for about a month, it was called off, and the house was put up for sale. In fact, the real estate agent explained, the entire neighborhood was known for being a somewhat creepy, uncomfortable area. Not many people were willing to live there. None of this information deterred me. I do not believe in ghosts or haunted houses. I believe in getting the best price possible for what I pay for, and I could not pass up a deal like this. After just the first week of occupancy in my new home, I discovered the downsides of living in a haunted house. Of course, there were many rumors floating around about what had happened to the old owners of the house. They were Russian spies, called back to the motherland after many years of service. No, they were devil worshippers, both of whom committed ritualistic suicide, which was then covered up by members of their cult. The rumors had gotten more and more ridiculous as time went by. But the rumor that seemed the most popular with the young folk was that the house was haunted, and that the elderly couple had been killed by vengeful spirits of the dead. After all, who doesn't love a good haunted house story? And thus began the incessant harassment at the hands of teenagers. Several times a week I would see them hanging around my house, snapping photos, daring each other to hop the fence onto my property. They had undoubtedly been doing this since before I moved in, but now that the house was occupied, they were more wary of trespassing. Even if they were being more careful about it, kids hopping my fence, running about my front lawn, and banging on my door started to become a regular occurrence. One time a kid actually entered my house. I had just gone to sleep in my bedroom on the second floor when I heard him. I must have forgotten to lock the front door that night. He came in quite loudly, not even trying to be inconspicuous. He ran straight through the first floor and crashed out the back door, laughing as he did so. No doubt his friends had dared him to sprint through the haunted house. As I watched him run away through my window, I yelled that I would call the cops if they ever tried that again. The outburst only seemed to make him laugh harder. The worst incident, however, was when they harassed my gardener. He was an older gentleman, at least 60 years of age, and his back was very bent, no doubt from years of gardening work. He lived in a small house, about 100 yards away from mine. He was the gardener for most of the neighborhood, and although I didn't really need anyone to garden my house, I kept him on anyways. I could tell he needed the business. The stupid kids had gone and thrown a smoke bomb right through his window at night. I could hear him coughing and hacking from my house. I raced over to his house and flung open the door. I went in and helped him outside onto his porch, where he continued to cough for another half hour. I wanted to call an ambulance for him, but he insisted that it was alright. That was the last straw. The next day I purchased a no trespassing sign on my way home and nailed it to the front yard fence. Before putting the sign up, I scrawled on it in black marker, "If I see any of you again, I will call the cops." Fortunately, the sign was effective. At first, they didn't go away entirely, although there were no more incidents of intruders in my house or harassment of my gardener. I couldn't tell if my threat of calling the police, the sign itself, or both of them kept them away. But I was glad that the level of harassment seemed to be diminishing. Eventually, I stopped seeing them altogether. Perhaps hanging around a haunted house had lost its appeal when faced with possible incarceration. Over the next few months, my life was completely normal. I was able to sleep much better thanks to not having to deal with annoying teenagers. My performance at work improved because I was better rested. Soon, however, strange incidents began occurring. One night I was sitting on my living room couch, watching television, when the lamp next to my television fell over. I suppose "fell over" is too light a phrase to describe this incident. It had actually been smashed against the wall behind my television set. The lamp was short and had a large base. I saw no way in which it could somehow lose balance. It had struck the wall with such a force that a piece of plaster had been chipped off, leaving a dent in the wall. The bulb had shattered into many pieces, which were now laying on the ground. Needless to say, I was extremely startled. I didn't know how to react. I just sat there for several moments, staring at the shattered lamp on the ground. Eventually, I got up and grabbed my dustpan, sweeping the bits of glass up and into the garbage. For a while, I examined the table that the lamp had been resting on. It was not slanted in any way. There were no irregularities on its surface that could have caused the lamp to fall. I could not understand what had happened. Eventually, I decided to forget about it. It was not worth worrying about. It was a very strange incident with no explanation, but not something I should concern myself with. Except these incidents did not cease. None of them were as startling or shocking as the lamp breaking, but they were subtler and more disturbing. When I set a book down on the table and left the room, it would be open to a different page when I came back. When I watched television, the channel would occasionally change for no apparent reason. Small incidences such as these continued for weeks, and they began to make me nervous. I started to become paranoid. I began to feel as if someone, something, was messing with me, trying to piss me off, trying to grab my attention. When I moved into this house, I did not believe in the paranormal, but now I wasn't so sure. The incidents started to become more and more frequent, and I was slowly losing my mind. Living in this house was driving me insane. Then I saw one of them. I was brushing my teeth in the bathroom, facing the mirror when I saw it. Not a person, just a silhouette. Something like a shadow fleeing across the wall behind me. I quickly turned around, but it was gone. Over the next few days, these strange shadows began appearing everywhere in the house, moving across the walls, grabbing my attention for a brief moment before disappearing. They always seemed to take a human shape. I started to become a nervous wreck. I hardly slept. My performance at work suffered could not concentrate on anything. I began to honestly believe that my house was haunted, that the previous owners of this home had indeed been attacked by vengeful spirits. For weeks I continued to stay in this house, not knowing what else to do. I dreaded coming home from work each day for the fear of spending another maddening night alone with those damned shadows. Finally, I broke down. I was in my living room, watching television just as I had been when the first incident occurred. I was attempting to distract myself from the hell I was living in when I saw it. Another shadow. It quickly moved across the wall behind my television set, except this one did not leave after a fraction of a second. This one stopped in the middle of the wall and stayed there, motionless. It was the silhouette of a man, standing, yet there was no man casting the shadow. I couldn't handle it. I rolled off the couch and curled into a ball, sobbing. I closed my eyes and prayed that this was all a nightmare, that when I opened my eyes the shadow would be gone. For how long I stayed like that, I do not know. Maybe an hour, maybe 2. Eventually I did open my eyes again. I looked up to the wall, only to see the shadow was still there, in the exact same position as before. This time, however, I noticed that its arm was slightly extended, its finger pointing at something. I followed the line from its finger to a dent in the wall. The dent was caused by the lamp crashing into it. For some reason, I was no longer afraid of the shadow on the wall. I now felt that it was simply trying to tell me something, to communicate with me. I scrambled over to the wall and closely examined the dent. There was nothing remarkable about it. A piece of plaster had been chipped away. Nothing more. What was so important about this dent, about this wall? I lifted the television off the table it was on and set it on the floor. I then moved the table away from the wall and got down on my hands and knees. I examined every part of the wall, closely searching for any strange features, for anything that could help me explain why there was a ghost on my wall. After a few minutes, I gave up. I could find nothing special, nothing noteworthy about this wall. It was just an ordinary wall. I was about to stand up when I noticed it. A faint line. A very faint line on the edge of the wall. I crawled over to it. The edge of the wall was just slightly dirtier. It had a slightly darker hue to it than the rest of the wall. There was a distinct line where this difference occurred. I followed the line around the entire wall. It encompassed the whole thing. Somebody had, at some point in the past, replastered the wall. Delirious from the lack of sleep and partially insane, I did the only thing I could think of in that moment. I ran to my garage, opened my tool drawer, and grabbed a large hammer and flashlight. I had to find out what was behind that wall. I swung the hammer with as much force as I could manage and felt a satisfying crunch as I punched a hole into the plaster. I immediately dislodged the hammer and swung it back. I beat the wall over and over, punching dozens of holes into it. I worked away at its center, slowly creating a large abscess. One time, as I brought the hammer back, I realized that there was a small piece of black plastic attached to it. Suddenly, a foul smell hit my nostrils. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it into the sizable hole I had created in the wall. I immediately saw that there was a large amount of black plastic behind the plaster. Setting my hammer down, I grabbed a handful of plastic and pulled. It tore off in my hand, leaving a strange, disgusting sludge on my arms. The foul smell grew worse. Suddenly, the plastic in the wall briefly moved, and a dark object fell out of the tear I had created in the plastic. I bent down and picked it up. It was covered in the black sludge and smelled absolutely disgusting. I wiped it off to reveal a white surface. As soon as I realized what it was, I flung it far across the room as I could. It was a bone. A human bone. Terrible realization dawned on me. I had found the previous owners of this house. They were here the whole time. They were with me as I watched television, as I ate, as I slept. They had never left. I stood there, too stunned to move. I was in shock. My mind did not know how to process this information. Eventually, I managed to move over to the sink in order to wash my hands of decomposing material. As I finished washing myself, my senses suddenly came back to me. I had to call the police. A murder had taken place in this house. Whoever did it was, in all likelihood, still out there. I rushed to the kitchen, grabbed my phone. I picked it up and began furiously punching the keypad. 911. As I moved my thumb over to the call button, I suddenly stopped. For a moment, I did not move. Then my hand slowly slacked and released my hold on the phone. The phone crashed onto the ground, shattering the screen. I was staring at my kitchen wall. At the very edge of the wall was a faint line that separated old plaster from new. The same kind of line that was on the wall behind the television. In a state of hysteria, I sprinted out of the kitchen. I ran around my house, sobbing loudly. I examined every wall in the house, and every single wall had been replastered. Panicking, I ran into my living room and grabbed my hammer. Expending all the energy I had left, I hammered away. I hammered at the walls for hours. Each time I came to a new wall, I prayed that I would find nothing behind it. Yet each time I struck the hammer into it, I found the same black, sludge-filled plastic that I had found behind my television set. My house was a graveyard. Dozens of bodies, rotting corpses, all neatly wrapped in plastic and packed into the walls, all in various states of decay. My mind finally snapped. I screamed at the top of my lungs. I screamed for hours until my vocal cords could not make a sound. Eventually, I collapsed onto the couch and laid there, sobbing. After some time, as I laid weeping on my couch, I heard a noise. A very faint creaking sound, as of a door slowly opened. I wiped my eyes and raised my head. In my front doorway stood the gardener. He had a smug smile on his face, as if he had just finished telling a hilarious joke to a laughing crowd. He stepped into my house and closed the front door, locking it behind him.
"Oh my, look at the mess you've made. It takes me hours to plaster each wall. Why did you have to go and tear them all down?"
In his hands he carried a tool bag. From where I was on the couch, I could see that it contained several bottles of wall plaster, a metal plaster spreader, rolls of black plastic, and a large knife. He set the bag on the floor, bent down, and withdrew the knife. He straightened his back, and for the first time I could see how tall he actually was. Despite his old age, his muscles were large and well-toned from years of manual labor.
"I am a very careful man. For 40 years, I have not been caught."
He nodded towards the wall that I had hammered apart. Black liquid was oozing out of the hole in its center.
"Before those two came to live here, I thought I'd accounted for everything. That I'd left no trace of any of my crimes. However, I never considered the possibility that my victims themselves might try to speak. That they might alert others of my activities. You see, those two old fools saw them as well. The fleeting shadows on the wall, my victims attempting to be found. So of course they had to go. Besides, with them occupying the house, I couldn't partake in my favorite hobby."
He turned his head to me and giggled. I looked into his eyes and saw nothing. No humanity, no empathy, no compassion. Nothing but a deranged hunger for killing.
"I must thank you, my friend. If it weren't for that sign you posted out front, I wouldn't be here tonight. If you hadn't posted that warning, this house would undoubtedly be swarming with curious teenagers, wondering what all the screaming is about. However, thanks to you, nobody is around. Nobody is here to hear your scream. Nobody can help you.
He stepped closer to me, holding the long, sharp knife. He expertly twirled the knife in his fingers, no doubt something he had practiced 1,000 times before.
I have one last question for you. Where'd you like to go? I believe that there's still room in the upstairs bathroom and bedroom walls. Your choice.
I said nothing. I was incapable of speaking. He shrugged.
Guess I'll have to choose for you. I'll be up all night replastering these walls anyways. Makes no difference to me. At least I'll have my shadow friends to keep me company. Maybe I'll even see you taking a stroll across the wall.
My eyes darted to the front window, streetlights illuminating the road. I was desperately searching for somebody, anybody who could help me. The gardener laughed.
There's nobody out here, my friend. Your sign scared them all away.
He bent down and brought the knife to my neck. My gaze stayed locked on the window. The last thing my eyes focused on was a thin piece of metal nailed to the fence. In that moment, I realized that the instrument of my death was not a knife, but a sign. An aluminum metal sign that I had purchased in order to keep those annoying kids off my property. On that sign were the 2 words that had sealed my fate, that had orchestrated my doom, that had brought the knife to my throat. No trespassing. If you like this video, please consider subscribing. And if you're an animal lover like me, please consider donating to the World Land Trust, a charity that aims to help wildlife through buying land, preventing development, and helping endangered species.